The sky above Earth burned with a kaleidoscope of dying embers, a celestial inferno that mirrored the ruin below. Entire cities lay in smoldering ruins, their skeletal structures silhouetted against the crimson glow of orbital bombardment. Streets once teeming with life now echoed with the cries of the wounded and the rasping breaths of the dying. Within the command bunker buried beneath the crumbling remains of New York, General Mira Chen clenched her fists around the console's edge, eyes fixed on the fractured holographic map. Red markers swarmed over Earth's surface like bloodstains, each representing a contingent of the Galactic Warlords' forces. Chen's jaw tightened as another district blinked out, absorbed by the advancing tide. "General," came the breathless voice of a young lieutenant. His face, smudged with ash and blood, twitched with barely contained panic. "The Western Command is gone." Last transmission indicated heavy artillery, plasma tanks, nothing left. Chen closed her eyes, swallowing the urge to scream. "What about the signal?" "Still broadcasting, ma'am," the lieutenant said, his voice brittle as he pointed to the console. The signal scrolled across the screen in stark, unblinking text. "Send me." Across the galaxy, that message echoed, a desperate plea cast into the void, a final gasp from a world gasping for a savior. Far from the shattered remnants of Earth, in the cold void of uncharted space, the man with no name drifted through the black. The ship was a relic from another era, its hull battered, engines humming with a low, mournful cadence. Inside, the man sat cross-legged amidst the dim, flickering light of a solitary console. His eyes were closed, expression impassive, as if caught in a trance or a dream. The transmission crackled through his ship speakers, tinny and distant. "Send me. Send me." The man's eyes opened, pupils dark and empty as the abyss outside. His face, marked with scars that told tales of 100 battles, remained still. He listened to the message repeat, over and over, a voice filled with desperation and defiance. For a moment, he reached for the console, his fingers hovering over the controls. But then he withdrew, leaning back against the cold metal wall, letting the ship drift further into the dark. On Earth, General Chen strode through the remains of the command bunker, her face hardened by grief and fury. Outside, survivors huddled in makeshift shelters, their eyes hollow, skin smudged with soot and grime. Soldiers limped by, faces blank with shock. A child clutched her mother's leg, staring at the sky as alien dropships blotted out the sun. The mother held her close, eyes darting nervously as a formation of warlord drones soared overhead, their metallic wings slicing through the air like razors. Chen gritted her teeth. "We need reinforcements," she muttered. "Anything. Anyone." The lieutenant who had delivered the earlier report approached her, his face pale. "Ma'am, we've picked up something." "What?" "A ship. Unidentified. Entering Earth's atmosphere." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Enemy. Unknown. No matching signatures in the database. And—" The lieutenant swallowed. "It's small. Barely a one-man craft." Chen's brow furrowed. "Patch it through." In the sky above, the solitary vessel sliced through the clouds, its battered hull glinting like a shard of forgotten steel. It moved with eerie precision, weaving between crumbling skyscrapers and flaming debris, before settling down in the heart of what once had been Times Square. The hatch hissed open, releasing a gust of cold, recycled air. Out stepped the man, his figure draped in a tattered cloak, his eyes as dark and unreadable as the void. Around him, survivors scrambled to hide, peering at him from behind overturned cars and collapsed storefronts. A soldier leveled a rifle at the stranger, hands shaking. "Identify yourself." The man said nothing, his gaze sweeping over the ruins, absorbing the extent of the devastation. The soldier swallowed, eyes darting nervously. Are you with them?" The man's gaze settled on the soldier, his face expressionless. Then, in one fluid motion, he extended his arm and caught a falling piece of debris that had been dislodged by a distant explosion. The massive hunk of concrete hovered inches from the soldier's head, held effortlessly in the stranger's grip. The soldier's mouth fell open as the man set the debris down, his movements slow, deliberate. "I'm not with them," the man said, his voice a low rasp, like metal scraping stone. Before the soldier could respond, A metallic screech echoed through the square. The air shimmered, and a contingent of warlord drones descended, their bladed limbs glinting like razors. They landed in unison, red ocular sensors locking onto the stranger. Identification required, one drone intoned, its mechanical voice devoid of emotion. Subject: unknown. Classification: hostile. The drones advanced, bladed limbs whirring. The man remained still, his cloak fluttering in the wind. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible, he moved. His hands became a blur, slicing through the air like scythes. Drones shattered upon impact, metal fragments raining down like shards of glass. The soldiers and survivors watched, eyes wide, as the man moved like a specter, weaving through the drones with fluid, lethal precision. In moments, the drones lay in pieces, their circuits sparking and smoldering. The man stood amidst the wreckage, breathing steadily, eyes fixed on the horizon. A hush fell over the square. Then, General Chen pushed her way through the gathering crowd, her jaw clenched. "Who the hell are you?" The man turned to face her. His eyes, dark and fathomless, met hers. "You called me." Chen's brow furrowed. "We sent a distress signal to anyone who could help. Not to you specifically." "You sent it," the man said, his tone flat. "And I answered." Chen stepped closer, her gaze searching his face. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, a shadow of a legend she had once heard in old war stories. "You fight like you were born for it," she said. "But we don't know you. Why should we trust you?" The man's expression remained unchanged. "Because you have no one else." Before Chen could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the sky. The ground trembled as a formation of warlord dropships emerged from the horizon, their engines screaming like banshees. Chen's hand went to her comm, her voice sharp. "All units, prepare for incoming assault." The man's gaze remained fixed on the approaching ships, his jaw set. Without a word, he turned and began walking toward the edge of the square, the tattered edges of his cloak trailing behind him like the wings of a fallen angel. Chen watched him go, fists clenched. "Who are you?" she called after him, her voice tinged with desperation. The man paused, his back to her. The wind howled, carrying with it the distant cries of the dying and the roar of descending ships. For a moment, it seemed as if he would say nothing. Then, without looking back, he said, "I'm no one." And as the first blast echoed through the city, engulfing the skyline in a wall of fire and ash, the man with no name strode forward, vanishing into the storm. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal as the man with no name stepped through the skeletal remains of the city. Above, the sky churned with ash clouds and the relentless hum of warlord dropships, their dark silhouettes slicing through the crimson haze like predatory birds. Debris crunched beneath his boots as he moved, his cloak trailing behind him in ragged swirls. All around, eyes peered from shattered windows and makeshift barricades, eyes filled with suspicion and fear. The survivors clutched makeshift weapons, their knuckles white, their expressions drawn and hollow. They did not know what to make of the stranger who had walked into their midst without a word. A small group of rebels emerged from the shadows, led by a wiry man with sharp eyes and a deep, jagged scar running from brow to jaw. He aimed a pulse rifle at the stranger's chest, finger twitching against the trigger. "You." The man's voice was rough, tinged with desperation. "Identify yourself." The stranger met his gaze, unmoving. Behind the scarred man, a cluster of young fighters shuffled nervously, eyes darting between the rifle and the newcomer. The stranger said nothing, his dark eyes as cold and unreadable as the abyss. "Are you deaf?" The scarred man snarled, stepping closer. "I said." The stranger moved. His hand shot out, seizing the barrel of the rifle. With a single, effortless twist, he wrenched it from the man's grip and flung it to the ground. The rifle clattered against the concrete, and the scarred man staggered back, eyes wide. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The young fighters raised their weapons, hands shaking, but the stranger remained still, his face impassive. "Who are you?" the scarred man demanded, breathing heavily. "A warlord spy?" The stranger's jaw clenched. "If I were, you'd already be dead." The scarred man swallowed, his chest heaving. "Then what the hell are you?" Before the stranger could respond, a high-pitched whine echoed through the air. The survivors stiffened, their eyes turning skyward. Above, a squadron of Warlord drones descended, their bladed wings slicing through the smoke. They hovered in formation, red ocular sensors locking onto the crowd. "Get down!" someone shouted. The drones opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the air in deadly arcs. People screamed, diving behind the wreckage of overturned vehicles. The scarred man yanked a child to the ground, covering her with his body as a plasma bolt seared the concrete inches away. The stranger did not move. His eyes tracked the drones, his muscles coiling beneath his cloak. Then he sprang into motion, moving with blinding speed. He leaped onto a toppled vehicle, cloak billowing as he launched himself skyward. One of the drones whirled to target him, but the stranger's fist connected with its chassis before it could fire. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, metal fragments raining down like shrapnel. Two more drones veered toward him, blades whirring, but the stranger twisted midair, snatching a severed wing from the falling wreckage and hurling it like a spear. The wing impaled the lead drone, and it crashed into its companion, both of them plummeting to the ground in a tangled heap of smoking metal. The scarred man gaped, eyes wide, as the stranger landed back on the ground, dust swirling around his boots. The remaining drones hovered, recalibrating. The stranger's gaze was calm, focused. "Everyone move," he barked, his voice carrying a command that cut through the chaos. "Get to cover. Now." The crowd scattered, sprinting for the cover of crumbling storefronts and broken walls. The scarred man hesitated, watching the stranger as he reached down, grabbing the discarded pulse rifle. He yanked a power cell from a fallen drone and slapped it into the rifle, the weapon's barrel humming to life. With the fluid, practiced movements of a seasoned fighter, the stranger aimed and fired. The plasma bolt seared through the air, striking the last drone square in its ocular sensor. The drone exploded in a blinding flash, its wreckage scattering across the street. Smoke drifted through the square, and for a moment, the only sound was the hiss of burning metal. The stranger lowered the rifle, his expression as stoic as stone. The scarred man rose slowly, his jaw clenched, his gaze never leaving the stranger. You saved us." The stranger tossed the rifle aside, his dark eyes meeting the scarred man's. "Where is your leader?" The scarred man swallowed, his throat bobbing. "General Chen. She's at the bunker. Follow me." The bunker was a cavernous, hastily fortified underground space buried beneath the remains of a subway station. The walls were reinforced with scraps of fallen drones and welded steel plates, the air thick with the scent of burnt circuitry and stale sweat. General Mira Chen stood at the center of a makeshift command post, barking orders at a cluster of exhausted soldiers. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her hair was tied back in a tight, utilitarian knot. When she saw the scarred man enter, her stern expression hardened further. "Darius," she said, crossing her arms. "Report." Darius jerked his thumb over his shoulder, and the stranger stepped forward. The room fell silent, every eye turning to the cloaked man who moved like a shadow among them. Chen's gaze narrowed. "Who the hell is this?" Darius opened his mouth, but the stranger spoke first. "You sent a distress signal," he said, his voice low, firm. "I answered." Chen's jaw clenched. "That signal was meant for our allies, what's left of them." "I'm not an ally," the stranger said, his tone devoid of inflection. "But I can help." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Help?" "I watched the surveillance feed. You took down a squad of Warlord drones barehanded. Who are you?" The stranger said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Darius cleared his throat. "General, he saved us out there. Took out those drones like they were nothing." Chen's eyes flicked to Darius, then back to the stranger. "And why would you do that? What do you want?" The stranger's expression remained blank. "Nothing." Chen's jaw tensed. "Nothing? People don't fight warlords for nothing." The stranger stepped forward, his dark eyes boring into hers. "You're running out of time," he said, voice soft but unyielding. The Warlords have a command ship in orbit, coordinating every attack. Destroy it, and you disrupt their entire network. Chen's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Because I know them, the stranger said, his voice a rasp of steel. And I know how they think. Darius's eyes widened, and a murmur rippled through the room. Chen's fists clenched, her jaw tight. You used to work for them, she said, her voice low, dangerous. The stranger's eyes darkened, shadows flickering across his scarred face. I fought them once, he said, and there was a weight to his words that hung heavy in the air. I know how to bring them down. Chen's jaw worked as she stared at him, weighing his words against the sinking feeling in her gut. Outside, the ground trembled as another distant explosion echoed through the city. Time was running out. Chen took a slow, measured breath. You say you can get us to that command ship? The stranger nodded once, his expression grim. But it won't be easy. And it won't be clean. Chen's gaze bore into him, searching for cracks in the stoic mask. What's your name? The stranger's eyes dropped to the ground, his jaw tightening. Names don't matter, he said, voice hard as iron. Survival does. Chen's eyes remained locked on him, but she gave a curt nod. Fine. You're in. But if you cross me, if you betray us, you won't have to worry, the stranger said, his tone devoid of emotion. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to end them. Outside, the distant rumble of engines grew louder, echoing through the underground bunker like the roar of an oncoming storm. The Warlords were closing in, and the man with no name had just declared war. The night sky churned with storm clouds, crackling with the fiery glow of plasma bolts and the thunderous roar of Warlord dropships. The command ship loomed above the city, a monstrous silhouette blotting out the stars, its surface bristling with turrets and scanning drones. Beneath it, the ruins of Earth's last bastion trembled as the Warlords intensified their assault, crushing any remaining pockets of resistance. Inside the bunker, General Chen stood before a holographic map, the flickering display casting ghostly blue light across her face. Sweat beaded on her brow as she studied the layout of the command ship, her eyes fixed on the central control hub, the Warlord's nerve center. The room was packed with grim-faced soldiers and resistance fighters, all eyes locked on the man with no name. The stranger stood apart from the others, arms crossed over his chest, gaze distant and unblinking. His dark eyes seemed to bore through the map, as if he could already see the corridors of the command ship, the layout of the defenses, the precise location of every patrol. Chen's jaw clenched. We're running out of time. The main control hub is here, she said, pointing to the ship's core. If we can get a small team in, take out their command center, we can disable the drones and ground the ships. That's a suicide run, Darius muttered, arms crossed. Their defenses will tear us apart before we even get close. That's why we're not sending a full assault, Chen said, her eyes flicking to the stranger. A small team. Fast. Quiet. The stranger's expression remained stony. You need a distraction, he said, voice low. A strike team to draw their attention. Give me 4 men. I'll get us inside. Chen's eyes narrowed. 4? You think you can take out their command center with 4 people? A ghost of a smile twitched at the corner of the stranger's mouth, a flash of something dark and cold. 4's enough. Darius stepped forward, fists clenched. And why should we trust you? We don't even know your name. You show up out of nowhere, tell us you can take down an entire Warlord command ship. How do we know you're not leading us into a trap? The stranger's gaze swung to Darius, his dark eyes colder than the void outside. If I were leading you into a trap, he said, his voice as hard as steel, you'd already be dead. Darius opened his mouth to retort, but Chen cut him off with a sharp gesture. Enough, she said. We don't have time for this. She turned to the stranger, jaw set. You get your 4 men. But if you betray us... I won't, the stranger said. Not today. The assault team moved through the wreckage of the city like shadows, slipping between crumbling buildings and piles of charred rubble. The air reeked of ozone and scorched flesh. Explosions echoed in the distance, punctuated by the piercing whine of drone patrols. The team consisted of the stranger, Darius, and two other resistance fighters, Hale and Lynn. Hale was a wiry sharpshooter with a calm, calculating expression, eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Lynn, a demolition expert, moved with a tense, jittery energy, fingers twitching against the grip of his blaster. Darius walked a step behind the stranger, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the man's back. Every movement the stranger made was precise, almost inhumanly so, as if he could sense the exact location of every patrol, every sentry, every camera. They reached the edge of the blast zone, where the Warlords had cleared a perimeter around the command ship. Towering defense turrets swiveled back and forth, scanning the area with beams of red light. Drones hovered overhead, scanning the ground with razor-sharp precision. The stranger dropped to a crouch, eyes fixed on the patrol patterns. 3 seconds between sweeps, he said, voice barely a murmur. Turrets are synced. Lynn, you got charges. Lynn nodded, teeth gritted. Enough to light up a continent. Good, the stranger said. You and Hale take out those turrets. Darius and I will handle the drones. Darius scowled, fingers flexing around the hilt of his knife. Why do I have to go with you? The stranger met his gaze, eyes like twin voids. Because you still don't trust me. Before Darius could respond, the stranger moved, darting forward with a speed that seemed to defy gravity. Darius had no choice but to follow, heart hammering as they sprinted across the open ground. A drone whirred above them, its ocular sensors swiveling in their direction. The stranger leaped, twisting midair to grab the drone's wing. With a sharp, brutal twist, he snapped the wing in two, sending the drone crashing to the ground. Darius caught his breath, staring as the stranger landed beside him, calm as stone. Keep moving, the stranger said. Behind them, a blast rocked the ground as Lynn and Hale detonated the first set of charges. Flames licked the sky, and the perimeter lights flickered. For a brief, precious moment, the surveillance systems went dark. The stranger grabbed Darius by the arm. Now, he said, and they sprinted for the command ship's entry hatch. Inside, the air was frigid, laced with a metallic scent of recycled oxygen and the distant thrum of engines. The corridors were a maze of steel and shadow, patrolled by Warlord sentries encased in gleaming exoskeletons. Darius pressed his back against the wall, pulse hammering as a patrol stomped past, metal boots clanging against the floor. The stranger stood beside him, still as a statue, eyes locked on the patrol's leader, a hulking brute with glowing red eyes and a serrated plasma blade strapped to his back. As the patrol passed, the stranger moved, slipping behind them like a phantom. Before the sentry could turn, the stranger drove his blade into the gap between its helmet and spine. The sentry crumpled without a sound, and the stranger lowered it to the ground, his movements eerily calm. Darius swallowed, throat tight. You've done this before, he muttered. The stranger wiped his blade clean, eyes distant. Too many times. They moved deeper into the command ship, the corridors growing narrower, the air colder. Alarms blared in the distance, Lynn and Hale's diversion drawing more guards away from the control hub. Darius glanced at the stranger, jaw clenched. You said you knew the Warlords. That you fought them. The stranger kept walking, eyes fixed ahead. I did. Who were you? The stranger didn't answer. They reached the control hub, a vast, circular chamber bristling with monitors and control panels. At the center stood the command console, its surface alight with streams of data. And beside it, flanked by two towering sentries, stood the Warlord commander. The commander was enormous, his armor black as obsidian, his eyes twin embers burning beneath a jagged, spiked helm. He turned as they entered, his gaze locking onto the stranger. Well, the commander said, voice echoing through the chamber. They said you were dead. The stranger stepped forward, blade drawn. Not yet. The sentries lunged, blade swinging. The stranger moved like a storm, blade flashing through the air in deadly arcs. Metal clashed against metal, sparks flying as he drove his blade into the first sentry's neck, severing its power core. Darius charged the second sentry, dodging its sweeping strike and slamming his knife into the gap beneath its arm. The sentry staggered, circuit sparking, and Darius drove the knife deeper, gritting his teeth against the spray of hot oil. The sentry collapsed, and Darius spun around to see the stranger and the commander locked in a brutal struggle. The commander swung his plasma blade, the weapon crackling with blue energy, but the stranger ducked beneath the strike, slashing upward to catch the commander's arm. The blade glanced off the armor, and the commander backhanded the stranger across the room. The stranger hit the wall hard, blood trickling from his mouth, but his eyes blazed with cold fury. The commander loomed over him, blade raised. "You should have stayed dead." The stranger's hand shot up, a small detonator clutched in his fist. The commander's eyes widened as the detonator clicked, and the room erupted in a blinding flash of fire and metal. Darius hit the ground, arms covering his head as the shock wave tore through the chamber. When the smoke cleared, the commander lay sprawled amidst the wreckage, armor cracked, flames licking at his limbs. The stranger rose to his feet, chest heaving, eyes burning as he strode toward the console. Darius pushed himself up, watching as the stranger typed in a series of commands, his jaw tight. The alarms blared louder, and the ship shuddered beneath them. The stranger stepped back, gaze fixed on the monitor as the screen flashed a single word, initiated. Darius staggered to his feet, breathing hard. "What did you do?" The stranger met his gaze, eyes cold and empty. "I ended them." The command ship shuddered violently, a low, ominous groan reverberating through its steel corridors as explosions rippled outward from the core. Flames licked up the walls, scorching the metal as the emergency lights flickered and died. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning circuitry. The stranger moved swiftly through the chaos, his dark eyes fixed forward, jaw clenched. Blood dripped from a gash along his temple, staining the collar of his tattered cloak. Behind him, Darius limped, one arm cradled against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You blew the reactor," Darius said, his voice strained. "The whole ship's going down." The stranger did not slow, his boots pounding against the floor as he rounded a corner. "We're not finished." Darius staggered to keep up, sweat and grime streaking his face. "Not finished. The Warlords are dead. You killed their commander. What the hell else is left?" The stranger's eyes remained fixed ahead, as though he could already see the exit, the world beyond the ship's collapsing hull. "Their fleet is still in orbit," he said, voice tight. "The drones are still operational. Until they're shut down, Earth isn't safe." Darius cursed under his breath, struggling to keep pace. "And how exactly do you plan to shut them down?" The stranger did not answer. The corridor shook again, flames bursting from a ruptured vent, and they both ducked, shielding their faces from the heat. When they straightened, the stranger's eyes had darkened, his expression taut with grim resolve. "There's a failsafe," he said, his voice lower now. "A control panel in the primary command deck. If I can access it, I can override their drone network." Darius swallowed, his throat dry. "And if you can't?" The stranger said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. They pushed forward, the walls groaning and buckling as the ship's structure began to fracture. Pipes burst, spewing jets of scalding steam, and bodies lay strewn across the floor, fallen Warlord sentries and resistance fighters alike. The air was heavy with the scent of burning flesh. Ahead, the command deck loomed, a vast, circular chamber lined with shattered control panels and sparking cables. The central console still glowed with a pulsing red light, its surface cracked but functional. The stranger stepped forward, eyes fixed on the console. His hands hovered over the controls, fingers trembling slightly as he input a series of commands. The screen flickered, data scrolling rapidly as the failsafe initiated. Darius watched, his chest heaving, as the stranger's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Come on," the stranger muttered under his breath. "Come on." The screen flashed again, a new line of text appearing in harsh, unblinking red. "Authorization required." Darius's eyes widened. "Authorization? What the hell does that mean?" The stranger's jaw clenched, his fists tightening. It means I need a key code." Darius cursed, slamming his fist against the console. "And where the hell are we supposed to get that?" "The commander's dead." The stranger's eyes darkened, his breath coming in slow, measured bursts. "Not dead," he said. "Not yet." Darius's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? You blew him to hell." The stranger stepped away from the console, his gaze fixed on the far side of the command deck. Amidst the smoke and falling debris, a hulking figure rose from the wreckage, the Warlord commander, his armor cracked and scorched, one arm hanging limp at his side. His eyes burned with cold, furious light as he staggered forward, dragging a serrated blade behind him. The stranger drew his own blade, its edge gleaming beneath the pulsing red lights. "Stay back," he said to Darius, his voice cold, final. The commander's lips twisted into a sneer, blood trickling down his chin. You betrayed us," he said, his voice a rasp of steel on stone. "You were one of us." The stranger's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. "I was never one of you." The commander lunged, blade swinging in a wide, brutal arc. The stranger ducked beneath the strike, his own blade flashing as he drove it toward the commander's ribs. The impact rang out, metal against metal, as the commander caught the blade in his hand, blood pouring from between his fingers. "You could have ruled with us," the commander snarled, eyes blazing. "You could have been a god." The stranger gritted his teeth, twisting the blade, but the commander's grip was iron, unyielding. "I don't want to be a god," the stranger said, his voice cold as the void. "I want to be free." With a savage twist, he tore his blade free, spinning to avoid the commander's next strike. The commander swung again, but his movements were slower now, his strength faltering as blood poured from his wounds. The stranger darted forward, his blade a blur, and drove it into the commander's chest. The blade pierced armor and flesh, sinking to the hilt, and the commander's eyes widened, his mouth falling open in a silent scream. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The commander swayed, his massive frame trembling, and then he collapsed, the ground shuddering beneath his weight. The stranger dropped to his knees, breath heaving, sweat and blood streaming down his face. Darius rushed forward, eyes wild. "Did you get it? Did you get the code?" The stranger nodded, jaw clenched as he reached into the commander's chestplate, pulling free a small, blood-soaked data chip. He staggered to his feet, shoving the chip into the console. The screen flickered, and then a new line of text appeared, override sequence initiated. A countdown began to tick down. 10 seconds, 9, 8. Outside the ship, the remaining Warlord drones began to falter, their engines sputtering as the override took effect. The dropships veered off course, spiraling out of control, flames consuming their hulls as they plummeted toward the ground. The stranger leaned against the console, eyes closed, chest heaving. Darius watched as the last dropship exploded in a fiery blossom of debris, raining metal and ash across the ruins of the city. "It's over," Darius said, voice soft, disbelieving. "You did it." The stranger opened his eyes, his gaze distant, unfocused. "Not yet," he said. "Not for me." Before Darius could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared, the floor buckling beneath them as the self-destruct sequence engaged. "Get to the evac pods," the stranger shouted, grabbing Darius by the arm and hauling him toward the exit. They sprinted through the collapsing corridors, flames leaping up the walls, explosions echoing behind them. Metal beams fell from the ceiling, crashing to the floor in showers of sparks. Darius stumbled, falling to one knee, but the stranger grabbed him, dragging him forward. "Move!" he roared, his eyes blazing. "Don't stop." They reached the evac pod bay, the last remaining pod gleaming beneath flickering lights. The stranger shoved Darius inside, his hands shaking. Darius grabbed his arm, eyes wide. "What about you?" The stranger shook his head, a faint, haunted smile ghosting across his lips. "I need to finish this." Before Darius could protest, the stranger slammed the hatch closed, his face a mask of grim determination. The pod launched, rocketing away from the ship as flames consumed the command deck. Inside the pod, Darius pressed his hands against the glass, watching as the ship erupted in a blinding flash of light, fragments of steel and fire raining down across the city. When the light faded, the sky was dark, the Warlord's command ship reduced to a smoldering crater. On the ground below, General Chen stared up at the sky, her jaw clenched, eyes gleaming with unshed tears. Darius staggered toward her, his face streaked with ash and blood. "He's gone," Darius said, his voice breaking. He saved us." Chen's eyes remained fixed on the heavens, her expression a mask of steely resolve. "Who was he?" Darius shook his head, his hands trembling. "No one," he said, voice thick with grief. "He was no one." And as the last embers of the ship's destruction floated down like falling stars, the wind carried away the echo of a single whispered word: "Free."